Recently, Nigeria's electricity regulator announced an adjustment in electricity tariff, grouping consumers in batches. This development has left many consumers disenchanted with the obvious burden it has put on the finances of the Nigerian masses. Today, with another imminent hike in electricity tariff, how will the already stretched masses cope with this with no alternative income to cushion this cost? Well, I'm delighted to have the Chief Technical Advisor to Nigeria's Minister of Power, Adedayo Olowoniyi. He joins us on Arise Prime Time. Glad to have you join us on Arise Prime Time, Adedayo, because his name is Adebayo, but Correct. This one is a D.
Correct.
Okay, before we get to the tariff, let's talk about how the nation wants to increase electricity access and boost renewable energy adoption. The FG is announcing a $23.2 billion energy access program, 15.5 from the private sector. Talk to us about this. How do they want to achieve this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hammond, and thank you for having me on your show. In terms of the investments that we're looking at in the power sector, a lot of it has been driven by what we call the Mission 300. Yeah. It's a program that has been developed by the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank. And we're just recently in Tanzania with the Honorable Minister of Power and Mr. President, where we signed the compact for Nigeria. The idea is to look for ways to provide access to 86 million Nigerians that currently don't have access to electricity. But it's always important to also take the fact that Nigeria has electrified over 150 million people already, which is sometimes even more than a lot of countries in West Africa. Part of what we have to do is to ensure reliability of supply for those that are already electrified and look at how we provide access for that 86 million. The fastest way to deliver access to the 86 million would be through what we call distributed renewable energy, like mini grids through solar PV, which you can deploy in rural areas very quickly. It's able to provide access very quickly. It also provides a subsidized electricity for the people in rural areas because the government subsidizes the capital investment and encourages the private sector to bring in additional investment to complete these plants and then run them over a period of time. So we expect that those types of connections are also subsidized to a certain extent of the capital expenditure that the government puts into the program.
How do you intend to woo the private sectors? Is it just Nigerians or all over the world, maybe like people like Siemens? And by the way, Nigerians would even want to know where the Siemens thing is at now.
Okay. I think I'll start with the first point that you asked in terms of wooing investors. We have to woo foreign direct investment as well. Nigeria has the most buoyant mini-grid market in Africa, and we already have a lot of foreign players already in the mini-grid market in Nigeria because we have a market that allows players to come in. Government has a very clear program through the Rural Electrification Agency that provides certain types of subsidy or grants or what we call capital subsidy to the developers, which allows them to catalyze further private sector investment to match that capital and deploy these assets. It allows them to deploy quicker, and that's why Nigeria was actually showing what we've done in Nigeria, and quite a few other African countries would actually copy the programs that the Rural Electrification Agency has actually implemented in the mini-grid space. So it's something for us to actually be proud about, that we've actually driven that market. We need to see how to continue to expand that market because it's the quickest way to provide access.
Siemens.
So in terms of the Siemens program, it started in 2018 under the previous government, but a lot of it was stopped for whatever reason. And when this government took over, with the Honorable Minister of Power convincing Mr. President, he signed an accelerated agreement with Siemens, which has led us to complete what we call the pilot phase. We are just starting phase 1. So now there's always a lot of misconception that the project has been ongoing since 2018. That's not the case. So we've just now gotten into phase 1, where we've signed 5 substations to be built, 5 brownfield substations to be reconstructed in different geopolitical zones in Nigeria. The phase 1 is going to consist of at least 15 brownfield substations and at least 20 greenfield substations. There's additional scope outside of the Siemens scope, which is on the distribution end. And the distribution end is with other contractors, which will be driving investment in the distribution segment. So transmission lines, injection substations. So we're really pushing hard to drive that Siemens project to conclusion because it has been stopped for a long time. It's a laudable program, and we want to ensure that we actually achieve the goals that are intended from the program.
All right, I don't want to go into what stopped it, but because there are many other things to talk about. So phase 1, how many phases? And when is phase 1 concluding?
Okay, so phase 1, as I said to you, of the Siemens program, which is the transmission segment, is about 15 brownfield substations and 20 greenfield substations. So when you put that into context, this could be 3 to 4 years, depending on, because a substation, I mean a greenfield substation is 24 to 36 months anyway. So just take it into context that you need to finalize the financing structures, put all those things together before finally going into the procurement process. So I'll say definitely 36 to 48 months.
That's about 3 years.
Yes, correct. But the brownfields are, yes, could be completed quicker. So I expect some commissioning of some brownfields within 24 months.
So how many phases?
Oh, in the Siemens project, there are actually supposed to be 3 phases.
Okay.
Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. We are now just in phase 1. And then when we complete phase 1, then we'll go into phase 2, which also includes some generation assets. But that will then be evaluated when the project gets there.
All right. You talked about the 300 Africa Energy Summit a while ago in Tanzania.
Mission 300.
You're looking at providing access to electricity to 300 million Africans, in fact.
Correct.
300 million Africans.
Correct.
By 2030, that's 5 years from today.
Yes.
What are the modalities? And when we're talking about renewable energy,
yes,
one would like to know where does wind play a role, where does solar play a role, how many sorts of renewable energies are we talking about here, you know?
Yeah, correct. So really, depending on your structure, it would determine the type of energy you're going to use. For us, there's been a lot of penetration of mini-grids through solar PV, and that's the initial focus. So we want to drive further mini-grid penetration because it's the fastest way to provide access. But we will not forget about investing in the national grid because we have a lot of people that are underserved on the national grid. And part of the challenges on the national grid has been the lack of investment over multiple years, where we have dilapidated infrastructure. Of course, there's vandalism. But so that's why it's a multi-pronged approach where we're going to continue to invest in the national grid to ensure further reliability and to drive quicker access in rural areas. We're going to invest in expanding the mini-grid program.
All right. Nigerians are waiting to hear. Are Nigerians going to pay more for electricity by way of another tariff?
Well, I don't believe it's about paying more for electricity.
No, you know why I'm asking this?
Yes, shoot, yes.
You know why?
No, why?
No, because there's a recent talk from Virgin that Nigeria is about 66 or 65% electricity, and she's coming to say, no, she was misquoted or she wasn't understood.
Correct.
So people are skeptical and on edge.
No, well, I can understand why Nigerians will be on edge, but one thing that I would like to assure, that the federal government continues to focus on how to ensure affordability. One of the key things, that we have to understand about electricity supply is that, yes, we do need a cost-reflective tariff, but we also have to try to answer the affordability question. And that's why government will continue to provide a subsidy, albeit a targeted subsidy. Because today, subsidy in Nigeria is almost open-ended, where the highest consumers of energy are the ones actually benefiting from electricity subsidy and not those who actually really need it.
I'm sure you know, of course, tariff was just yesterday, I mean.
Correct.
Yeah, so, I mean.
No, so that's what I'm saying, that when people talk about, so I'll give you this overview, right? Before the Band A tariff increase, the total value of electricity that was being paid by the market was about 10%, which means government, as of January 2024, was providing about 90% subsidy, which was not sustainable. After the Band A increase, we moved to about 38 to 40%, which means that government is still paying about 60% subsidy. So we need to look for how the market is going to continue to pay an increased amount of energy consumed, because that is the only thing that will truly drive investment in the medium and the long term in the sector. So what government will continue to focus on is how do you ensure that the subsidy that federal government will provide is going to be targeted towards those who require it, rather than it just being an open-ended subsidy to the highest consumers of energy, like it is in all developed markets and even other African markets, where you are targeting subsidy at those who really require it from an economic perspective.
You know, people always wonder, because governments all over the world, I mean, there's nowhere that you don't have subsidies,
100%.
All right, Nigeria has struggled with output, still hobbling between 4,005, maybe 500, megawatts. Raising output has been affected by grid collapses. When will Nigerians wave goodbye to grid collapses?
Okay, first of all, let me start with the generation topic you posed. I would say last year was pretty good from a generation point of view compared to what this administration met. It was about 4,200, and I think it raised general or average generation to about 5.5 gigawatts, about 5,500 on a regular basis. In fact, there were multiple times last year that we could have surpassed the highest average, which was 5,800. But this was because also distribution companies would not take the energy. They would not supply energy to where they can also not recover. So I'm convinced that we will continue to move the generation capacity a lot higher because there is available capacity. As the liquidity continues to improve in the market, we can assure that generation capacity will also increase with the level of liquidity that increases, because a lot of the generation companies today are owed significant amounts of money due to the lack of subsidy that hasn't been paid. So as we continue to drive liquidity in the sector, we will see a significant increase in generation to match that.
Well, I was going to ask you, but I don't know whether you will give me a... you are still saying something?
Yes, so I was going to then talk about you talked about the grid collapse. It's very difficult to give a specific timeline on grid collapse because the issues of grid collapse are multi-pronged. One, you have the aging assets that require significant investment. And on the other side, for an already fragile grid, then you now have the impact of vandalization. So it's always a very, very difficult balance to pick to say when will grid collapse stop. But one thing I can assure, that the federal government is making significant strides in investing in the national grid to ensure further reliability. And there's a lot of work going with the National Security Advisor and security organizations to find different ways to curb vandalism. One of the things the Honorable Minister has looked at is, how do you work with those communities? There are lots of community transmission network goes around Nigeria in different types of communities. And the best way to protect these assets will be through those communities. So the Honorable Minister has thought of different ways to engage those communities to see how they can also be part of protecting those assets. We believe that will be the long-term. That would be the quickest way to actually arrest a lot of the level of vandalism that we've seen across the country.
I remember Abubakar Ali of the REA.
Yes.
Talking about how to involve communities
100%.
So they can own it, and 100%. That will help sustainability. Yes. You just answered that question on vandalism. All right, well, I think it was, I was going to ask you, okay, by the way, so are you telling us that we'll still experience grid collapses?
Well, I don't want to be the one who says there will be zero grid collapses.
You don't want to be the prophet.
No, but it's just the reality of the sector that we are in. But what we are doing is making sure that we are building the grid for reliability. For example, the Siemens project you've mentioned is going to provide further reliability. We're looking at a super grid that will also provide further reliability. But in the short term, there are basic things that need to be done. Focusing on operations and maintenance, focusing on key transmission lines, key nodes in key generation areas that have a big impact on the fragility of the grid. Fixing some vandalized lines that take energy to the north to ensure that the grid is balanced. Because part of the challenges we faced last year was a grid imbalance. Because some specific lines have been vandalized that take significant electricity to the north. When you have that, you have a total imbalance of the network. So things that happen on other lines that typically would not have caused a grid collapse potentially could cause a grid collapse. So some of the things that have to be done in the short term is bringing those lines back that had been vandalized and then focusing on going back to the basics, ensuring detailed operation and maintenance plans, and focusing on key nodes where large power is being transmitted.
All right. About 250 companies have exited the national grid for self-generated power, what you call captive power.
Yes,
and
correct.
they have together 6,500 megawatts. Dangote alone produces 1,500 that could fit the whole of a battle, for example. What does this portend? Do we say shame to the nation, to the country and its leaders?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'll say every business does what it needs to do to ensure business continuity, right? So it's without industry on the national grid, you will not succeed. That's just the reality. In South Africa, 70% on the energy on the national grid goes to industry. But for you to deliver energy to industry, you require reliability. They must be 100% confident that they would receive electricity 24 hours without interruption. And where there's interruption, there's a proper process for alternative delivery of energy that they do not naturally see in their production facilities. So that's why a lot of businesses have actually gone off-grid. But it just tells you about the potential of the electricity sector in Nigeria. When you think about how much captive investment has been made to go off-grid, if we get the grid right and we get reliability right, a lot of these customers will come back because the grid is inevitably cheaper than captive generation.
Of course, that's why they went off in the first place. 18 months after Tinubu signed the Electricity Act, 27 of the 36 states are yet to start implementation. Why? Is it bureaucracy? Is it that the plans were not laid out? Or is it lousiness on the part of state government and governors?
No, I think in a lot of the engagements, we're engaging with the Nigerian Governors Forum, we're engaged regularly with the state commissioners. They're making a lot of efforts. State electricity market is not just something you walk into, because the national market, when you think about it, even when you fragment it into state markets, when you put it together, it's the same national market, right? So you can see the challenges you have in the national market. So states are also taking their time to understand what does it mean to actually create a state market? What does the state have to do to catalyze further investment? How do they create a market? How do they create a regulator that will regulate the distribution company in their market? So it's not just an easy step. It has to be a step that is carefully taken and properly planned. But we're 100% sure that we will see some successes in the near future of some state markets that will do a great job at creating their state market and regulating their state markets.
One hopes that takes up, because that will, to a large extent, help the electricity access for most Nigerians.
100%.
Now, TCN is promising what they call a backup or buffer system to prevent Nigerians suffering blackout when grid collapses. Has this been done?
Well, I mean, I'm not 100% sure what that backup is, but
Or buffer means?
so the way I look at it is that in a national grid, it's like a highway.
Because because I asked you, does it mean Nigerians still experience grid collapses? So
correct.
if they can get us what will stop blackout if it does occur,
Correct.
that is still some relief.
Obviously, and that's what I'm trying to explain. So I believe what they're trying to do is to ensure that we create islands and alternative routes. So in a lot of markets, you have grid disturbances, but a lot of those grid disturbances don't impact the customers because one, you can island quickly certain areas to prevent the grid disturbance, or you provide alternative routes so that energy is still delivered to the people downstream. So again, a lot of this is about your contingency. So typically we should have an N-1 contingency on the transmission line, which means that there should be an additional route where you can transmit electricity to. So I believe this is what TCN is talking about, to ensure that, and that's why I was talking about some of the vandalized lines. It's important that we bring them back because they give us alternatives to delivering energy where you might have a grid interference or a disturbance in a certain axis. And capacity to island is also very important because then you can keep those areas electrified while you bring up other areas that might have been impacted by grid disturbance. So it's the way of managing and ensuring efficiency of managing grid interferences.
Now, with the latest development, I'm sure you know about what's happening in America. You said, where Trump is trying to turn it into a government agency, and 2 people have been sacked, the deputy director, the director of security and his deputy. What happens to the investment of 115 billion naira into Nigeria's power sector from USAID?
Well, I think it's difficult to make a judgment on that now because I believe from a political perspective, I think the United States will do what's important for them. I don't see how that would necessarily impact the investment out here at this point in time, but we'll just have to wait and see. We have a lot of partners. We have the European Union, we have China, we have Japan. So there are quite a lot of partners. We have the World Bank, we have AFDB, and we just came back from an investment trip in Tanzania where we're looking for over $32 billion to drive investment in the energy value chain. So we are convinced that we have sold the right story. People, investors understand that Nigeria is moving forward. They actually appreciate a lot of the reforms that Mr. President has actually implemented because it gives more comfort to the investors that when they bring their money into this sector in Nigeria, there will be a clear line of sight on their return. And that is what is going to enable Nigeria to catalyze the level of investment that we actually need to deliver 24 hours electricity.
Government plans to roll out 7 million prepaid meters. I mean, this is one sticking point.
Correct.
7 million prepaid meters to avoid estimated billing.
Yes.
Has it been done?
Oh, yes, it started already. So there are 2 programs. There's what we call the DISREP program through the World Bank, where 1.7 million meters has already been procured as of December, of course, procurement. Then the delivery would be, I believe, within Q1 and Q2. And then we have the Presidential Metering Initiative,
PMI,
which is one of the first interventions the president decided to make when this administration came into. And the idea is to provide 2 million meters a year through the PMI to be able to close the meter gap. So we're already on the way there. The procurement is being done in January for the PMI, and then we expect implementation driven throughout the year. Part of the challenge is when you buy 2 million meters and you also have 1.7 million meters coming from the World Bank program, you might have about 3.7 million meters to I would say, commission and implement in the same period. So part of what we're doing is working with NAPTIN, working with NEMSA to actually train a lot of installers, because this will also create jobs and really allow the higher level of implementation of the PMI and the DISREP. So it's going to be beneficial, both from an employment point of view and also making sure that people get meters.
All right, just in a sentence, so Nigerians can rest assured that there's no increase in tariff.
Well, what I said is that Nigerians can rest assured that the government is focused on ensuring that targeted subsidy will continue to remain in the market, where the government continues to support those who need electricity subsidy.
So there's no increase in tariff.
I would focus on the fact that government will continue to support.
No, because government can't even afford to start doing that now when they just did it the other day. All right, we're going to have to leave it here. I'm sorry.
It's a pleasure.
That's the what you can take. All right, thank you, Adedayo, for being on the program.